Thank you very much, Pat. Good evening, everybody. I'm so pleased to be talking to Faye Kellerman, who I haven't seen. Actually, I've seen her much more often than in the last year because she had property in Santa Fe and so did we. And here we are. I may follow her to Israel instead, which in fact is part of this book. Is there are scenes in Israel, which I know are a result of Faye and Jonathan's acquiring a lovely home there. So this is called The Hunt. Faye has very kindly autographed copies for us. This is not one of them. This is my advanced reading copy, but they will be at the Poison Pen very shortly. So Faye, when last we spoke in person, we had dinner in California. You indicated to me that you were thinking that maybe you were going to bring the series to a close. So when I opened this book, guess what I read?
Definitely a hiatus. There are a lot of other things I want to do. Turning 70 was a big milestone, a little scary. And I had done this career for 35 years. I wanted to bring the series to a close the way I wanted to, and not kind of in an artificial way where I was chasing, where I didn't quite know where I was going, but I just had to compulsively write. So this was a story that I had thought of for both Decker and the subplot of Chris and Terry a long, long time ago. And I knew I was going to close with something akin to this. So I wrote exactly the book I wanted to write for the end or the hiatus. Now, I'm not saying another idea will never pop into my head, but writing a book is a great effort. Even if it comes easy to you, and even if you have the ideas, it still takes a long time and a lot of thought to pen a book. So I am taking a break right now, doing a lot of other things that I've always wanted to do, and it's really been very nice.
Well, I hope you're going to enjoy it. I mean, it actually says here, I dedicate the final Peter Decker and Rena Lazarus novel to you, her fans who have followed her. But I'd like to think it might just be a hiatus. But I'll tell you what I did. I went back to my own bookshelf and look what I have here. I have my very own copy of The Ritual Bath, 1986, published from Arbor House. But what I really love, look at this. Here's Faye. This is her author picture. Whoa, I'm trying to do it without the glare and it's kind of hard. But there's
I still have curly hair. My hair is naturally dark, as you can see. But as you get older, this streak over here is white. So I was determined to leave it white, but I wanted it to blend in. So I started putting the blonde streaks, and I got successively more and more blonde. So I kind of like it.
I do too. Actually, I had a hairdresser years ago who said that there was a reason that people went gray. It's kinder as you get older to have, lighter hair. But anyway, The Ritual Bath, I mean, this was a book that really took people by storm. I think it might have been one of the first books where you actually, you are one of the thing you did were somebody, and The Murder in the Yeshiva. Sorry, there goes my interconnection being weird again. Hang on, there it goes. I know it goes unstable every once in a while at this time of night. So in 1986, that was kind of a groundbreaking thing to bringing some elements of orthodoxy into a mystery novel.
It was kind of a write what you know and write what you love, and it just took off from there. I always say this story: when you write your first novel, you have no idea it's your first novel. And usually it isn't the first attempt that most authors have at writing. So I did several attempts, and then I finally settled down and I said, I am interested in other cultures. I am interested in other people, and I hope people are interested in my culture. So that's how The Ritual Bath kind of evolved. It started first with Rena Lazarus and a mystery crime, because I love mysteries. After a while, I was thinking, well, it's not going to work to have an Orthodox Jewish woman solve mysteries. I mean, they did it with the rabbis the Kemmelman series, but it was sort of an artificial thing for me. So I brought in Peter. So then I had an unmarried woman and an unmarried man. I said, okay, let me throw a romance in there, because when you're writing this novel that you don't know is your first novel, you are throwing in a lot of things to see if you can get somebody's attention. Luckily, it worked out. It was not published with a big fanfare. It was published with maybe a hardcover, 1,100 books, where way back when they had more than 5 bookstores in the entire country. It didn't amount to an immediate bestseller, but back then publishing was very, very patient, and they allowed me to write another book, which was Sacred and Profane. And I liked these characters very much, and I thought they were good vehicles to tell a lot of interesting crime novels. So it just evolved from there. I've always loved Peter and Rita. They're always part of my heart. And I'm even thinking of other stories involving them, but I don't know if I'm ready to write a book yet.
Well, you have, because so much of The Hunt focuses on Gabe, this child that they have raised, whose parents actually work out their story in The Hunt. I will say that you took no prisoners in The Hunt, Faye. I mean, you really didn't. I was, we can't talk about it, but I thought, you went right
about it. It's a tough book. It's a sexually explicit book. It is a cruel book. Somebody said it was 50 Shades of Faye instead of 50 Shades of Grey. And I took great offense to that, because I thought 50 Shades of Grey, and I, without commenting on the novel or anything, did not show what a real psychopath and what a real bully is and what a real rapist is. They sugarcoated the whole thing, like this was so sweet and everything, and it was sexual and great. My guy, Chris, who is kind of a fan favorite, he was started out in Justice, is a real psychopath. And his only redeeming feature is he actually loves his wife, ex-wife, girlfriend, whatever you want to call her, Terry. But he's a bad man and he's a mean man. And I wanted to show what cruelty was. It's not something that's just exciting or that you pass over lightly. I wanted to do it right, and I think I did.
I think you did too. And in the ritual bath, I have, spent so many years since I've read it, coming up on 40, actually, 36. I'd forgotten that there was a violent crime, a rape, that in the book. And in fact, here's Pete Decker working for the LAPD. Here's about not only a rape in the yeshiva up in the hills in Los Angeles, but incidents of anti-Semitic violence. So, you started out with a violent crime, and in The Hunt, there's a lot of terrible things that go on. You were a dentist by training, but in The Hunt, it also reveals, I think, a lot of medical training, because the trauma that's inflicted on Chris's wife and the way he tries to deal with it, Jonathan's a psychologist, even though he's a doctor first. Where did you pick up all the medical knowledge?
Well, going to dental school, a lot. There's a lot of overlap between medicine and dentistry. It's not hard when you want to look up a medical thing if you have slightly medical background to transfer from one to the other. We went through ERs and we went through trauma centers, and we saw stuff like that too. And as a crime writer, you go to the morgue and you see very violent things, a lot of natural deaths, but a lot of very sad things. Death, to me, from the ritual bath on up, was never a cozy. Death was always a murder, and rape and crime was always something that was very, very ugly, that you just don't have a crime and a dead body and then drink cocktails in the other room. That is not what I say. It's an ugly, horrible, really heart-wrenching thing. And I try to, in all my novels, have this sympathy for the victim, as well as to a very interesting plot to how this victim got there, whether it was a crime that involved death, whether it was a crime that involved assault, a rape, a sexual assault, something brutal with children, you always want to know motivation and how they got there. But let's not forget about the victim in trying to solve the plot.
So years ago, Pete and Rena took over the care of this young boy named Gabe, whose parents were Christopher and Terry. And neither one of them seemed able to raise him. And so we've kind of come full circle, haven't we, here, that Gabe has been a part of the Decker Lazarus family for a long time. But now his parents are back in the front because Terry has been, well, you tell it, it's your book. Why am I telling it?
The book starts out with Gabe with Peter and Rena, his foster parents, and segues into his parents because his mother is kind of running away with her children, legally or illegally, we don't know, that she had from another man in India. And the book starts out with her being, Terry McLaughlin being beaten mercilessly in an attempt to get the kids back. So that's the whole premise. And then she hooks up back with her ex-husband, who she hasn't seen in 11 years, who's an ex-hitman. He now owns a brothel, a kind of a Disneyland sort of brothel. And he takes her back in and nurses her back to health. And then it re-explores their relationship. And what I liked specifically about this book is during Peter and Rena's time over the past 35 years, they've always had a working, functional relationship. What a relationship should be. They've had their ups, they've had their downs, but they do communication extremely well, and they really love each other. And it's a good, healthy relationship. And as a result, they have a healthy family, a big family, and it was a lot of fun to write about them. However, dysfunctional people are always a ball to write about. They're so much juicier and a lot of fun. So it was it was very interesting to me to contrast a very functional relationship of Peter and Rena, which my fans have known for all these years, with a very, very dysfunctional, bad relationship of Terry and Chris. But yet I think their relationship is very interesting. It's kind of like a perverted Romeo and Juliet in its own way. So it was a lot of fun comparing and contrasting. And of course, Peter has his murder, and then we deal with Terry and her kidnapped child and how it all works together in the end, which it was a lot of fun too.
Well, Terry has married after she and Chris divorced, has married a doctor from India, right? And she has
Right.
2 children, and she doesn't want to. I'm trying to remember whether she doesn't want to live in India. She doesn't want them raised in India.
She
whatever it is.
Raised in India. I mean, she thinks specifically her daughter Julene, who's very much involved in the book and was one of the saving graces of. I mean, in this brothel, Terry's there and she's with one of her children. Her son has been kidnapped. And this is just this fabulous girl who is coping, sort of like Gabe was coping. He had a very rough upbringing down the line. He was taken over by the Deckers because both, like you said, both of his parents were unable to really give him the nurturance he needed. Terry disappeared and kind of dropped them on the Deckers, and they've been taking care of him. But he's a resilient person, and so is his half-sister Julene, who is just a wonderful, wonderful character. And I think I feel Terry brought her to America because she felt her chances as a woman were much greater in America than they would have been in India. They have, especially with her husband, who has very strict ideas of what an Indian wife should and shouldn't be.
Right. So she ends up, Terry, very badly beaten, and Gabe, it appears that the only person that can rescue her and give her medical attention is in fact Christopher, who has his own jet. And so that's how they're brought back together again, right?
That is how they're brought back together.
Right. And then it becomes apparent that Christopher has never really stop loving Terry, despite the fact that their relationship disintegrated. And if he's a psychopath, this is his emotional vulnerability, if he has one, right? Is Terry, because he really does love her, and that's a huge part of the book, is to see how that plays out. But what I like, since I know that you and Jonathan have bought this wonderful property in Israel, is that when it starts, Rena and Pete are attempting to leave the United States to fly to Israel and enjoy their time there. And I was afraid for a moment that you were going to prevent them from doing that, because Pete gets one of those, if you're in homicide, last minute calls and whatever. And Rena makes him promise. They get on the plane. She makes him promise to put all his electronics away and enjoy the flight. And, she takes her pill, and he decides not to take his Ambien and instead working on his phone. But at least their time in Israel, they appear to really enjoy it. And I thought that might reflect, because you and Jonathan finally got there last May, right? After COVID completely derailed your plans.
Completely. COVID helped because we had this apartment that we were renovating, and because of COVID, a lot of things shut down, but the building trade was allowed to resume, so work continued on it. But once it was done, we couldn't get there because of COVID and strict relations. But we finally got there. We've made a couple of trips there, and it's marvelous. Jerusalem's an ancient city. It's it's ancient and very modern in the same time. I mean, we have there's things there that we don't have here in the United States. They're a little bit ahead of us in certain ways, but there's just a lot of interesting places to walk and interesting places to get into trouble. So this is where your mind starts going, what if Peter did this and this came in? And you see scenes by scenes by scenes, because you'll see like a modern cafe built near a very ancient well or a very ancient wine press. You'll go to a modern winery, and right outside the modern winery with all the steel vats and the oaks and everything is an ancient wine press. So you have this distinction of old and new. And I always like contrast. In The Hunt, it was dysfunctional. And if I would write something in Israel, it would be a very modern country with a very ancient past. So your mind starts working all over. And Israel is a very diverse country. It has a tremendous amount of people from a tremendous amount of countries speaking a billion different kind of languages. And you have African music, you have Mideastern music, you have Eurotrash pop, you have American music. It's just a fabulous place. It's a good place to integrate a lot of different cultures. And with that, you get a lot of different ideas.
Because it's small, it's possible to sort of experience it all, isn't it? As opposed to, a giant place. I mean, the only time I have been there, not actually in Israel, but in Jordan, floating in the Dead Sea and looking up at the lights of Jerusalem. I think, if you haven't been there, it seems larger than it really is. I love the fact that it's so small and that you can experience it all.
It's a tiny country. I liken Israel to the Talmud. It's a discrete entity, and you can read the Talmud straight through as just text does, or you can do what they do in the Shiva and take a dive into it and analyze each word. And Israel's kind of like that. You can take a big overview, but if you get to a certain part, you start digging in the history. One history leads to another. You can spend a month on one area of one dig and never get to the bottom of it. It's just that type of country. Like I said, we're we walk around a lot in Jerusalem, and this year we're going a little bit farther up north to see the migrations of the birds. And I didn't learn about this from a Jewish magazine. I learned about it from a birder magazine. I love birds. And I said, oh my God, and I didn't even know this existed there. So each area is very different. Each area has its modernity. Each area has its classical history. I mean, the Kinneret, why am I blanking on it? The Sea of Galilee, that's what the English is this old place where Jesus came from. And then you get the Jaffa spot where it's very ancient. And one of the great rabbis, Rabbi Akiva, is buried there. So you get this mix, and yet we're staying at a hotel that's new and modern, that's right on the Sea of Galilee. So you get this wonderful mix of old and new, and you can explore areas for a long, long time, and there's still more to explore because it's so old.
Such a contrast with Los Angeles, where you live most of the time. In fact, I was thinking that, I mean, we start out with a ritual bath and we are in Los Angeles, but gradually well, not gradually, you did move Pete and Rena east when Pete took a different job. Sorry, just a minute again while my screen freezes. But it was it book 4 where they went to Brooklyn, if I remember. They went into the Orthodox community in Brooklyn for some reason. I think it was book 4. And that was really interesting, but they didn't settle there. Right. But why did you decide to move them from Los Angeles to New York? Was that because Pete retired and he wanted a different job, or maybe he didn't retire, but anyway, got a different position offered to him, and it gave you a chance to then write about other things?
Right. I've always liked writing about, I like change of sceneries. He moved several times in his own, in Los Angeles to different substations. This first one was in more rural things. I was allowed to explore beekeepers. I was allowed to explore a lot more of rural life. And then I decided to move him to a more citified substation. And then I decided to just move him after many, many books with him in Los Angeles. I thought I said a lot of the LA story that I wanted to settle. And I've always been one with land and nature and smaller towns anyway, even though I live in this tremendously big city. I'm 70 years old. I grew up in LA when, you know, there were still candy stores around the corner. I walked to school and people didn't, you know, oh, it's all these stories that you hear. We never locked our doors. Well, we did lock these doors. We were the type of family, we'd ride our bikes in the street. It was a very, very different Los Angeles that I grew up in. And it's the different times. It's very different from what it is now. It's unrecognizable. So I always came back to that kind of small town feeling. And when I felt I had said as much as I wanted to say about Los Angeles, I moved them because, you know, as series characters, you don't want to make major changes in their personalities, but what you can do is put them in different situations, novel situations, and see how they react in that. So that not only gave me more ideas and newer ideas of how to rework this location, because as any crime writer knows, your location is a character in your book. If you don't have a good sense of place in a mystery novel, I think you're really missing out on something. It should be the type of crime that can take place anywhere. It should be distinct in your mind that this location would produce this kind of crime. And that's what I did. So I've always liked, and many of my books have ended up in hillsides and in rural areas, tracking the body or tracking the killers, because that's what appeals to me.
Right. Well, the hunt actually, part of it takes place in Nevada because Jack is, you know, he's running his brothel and his business in a smaller town in Nevada. So, you know, we get to spend time there. And as I've already mentioned, we spend time in Israel. But I agree that most of the time when there's a long series, you identify a character and a place together, whether it's Spencer's Boston or V.I. Warshawski's Chicago, or, you know, a person who has broken that somewhat. And we've met with him in Santa Fe is John Sanford, who's taken Luke goes to Davenport from the Twin Cities and moved him around some and has now made him a U.S. Marshal so that he can, he can go all around. But I think that was, I'm trying to remember, he must be nearly 40 books into that series. And I think he doesn't live in Minneapolis anymore. So, gave him something new. But I remember you said to me that when Pete and Rena went east to live in New York, that you could then take them into Manhattan. So it gave you an opportunity to write about New York City too. When, you had written about Brooklyn, all those books back, but now you got a chance to do some new stuff with New York. And again, you lived in New York, you had a place in New York for quite a long time. So you knew New York pretty well.
I took him into New York. I took him into Manhattan. I took him, there was the Stone Kiss. They went back to New York. They went back to Brooklyn, and then we were all around Manhattan. Yeah. We went in upstate New York. We went, like I said, I like different locales. Santa Fe, I had a house in Santa Fe for a while and a house in New York for a while. And I did take Peter to Santa Fe. I wrote a whole book called The Killing Season that took place in Santa Fe. And that's my love of book for Santa Fe. I think I just am a kind of a restless person, even though I've been here in LA since I was 5 years old, for 65 years. John and I celebrated our 50th anniversary this year. So I'm a stable person, but within that stability, I like a lot of action and a lot of adventure. And I drag my characters wherever I go.
I remember when you and John were guests of honor at Left Coast Crime in Hawaii. And you remember you and Rob and I and Jonathan went out to dinner in Honolulu. And it was fun, to be in a different place. But it felt slightly out of context because I'm used to seeing you in Santa Fe or Los Angeles, and here we all were in Honolulu.
Or Phoenix or in Arizona, which we've gone to your store in live person for many, 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 many years in Scottsdale. And we've always been very, very fond of your bookstore because it is the ultimate bookstore. And we've been doing this for God knows how many years, and I hope you will continue to do with John and Jesse. But it did feel out of a little bit different seeing you in Hawaii, a little bit fun seeing us. And, we had a very, very good time. And Jesse was there with his family, and it was a very good Left Coast Crime. I was very honored.
You're right. I like the fact that, it changes things up a little bit when you encounter people in a place that you're not used to. And speaking of Jesse, you and Jonathan are both very successful writers, but your son Jesse is a wonderful writer, and you have a daughter who's a writer. So, you didn't raise them. I mean, I probably talked to Jonathan more about this than I have to you, but, you let your children mark their own paths and find themselves. But do you think living with writers encouraged them to be writers?
I think it definitely encouraged them, but I think there's a genetic component to this. And I think they liked writing. They're all good writers, all four of them. The middle two are psychologists, PhD psychologists, clinical psychologists like Daddy. And the two bookends are both writers, no dentists in the family, but they've married quite a few doctors in there. We have everything. We have a large family, a lot of grandchildren. So who knows what we have in the future. But I've always felt that our kids should forge their own paths because that's what I did. And it's very sad when they don't. They have to be what they want to do. And I think they've all four have done that and have done that very successfully. I'm very, very proud of our children. I think they've just done a marvelous job with their lives and everybody makes mistakes, but I think they've made a lot fewer than maybe we did in our generation. You'd like to think it's the guidance, but maybe it's just they're smarter. Who knows?
Who knows, indeed. Well, Jesse's the one I know the best. And of course, I think he's a wonderful writer. He's continuing to write his series set up in Berkeley in the Bay Area with John. But I noticed when I looked again at the dedication in the ritual bath, there are only 3 munchkins. It's Jesse, Rachel, and Hannah. So you must have had a 4th child while you were producing books as well.
Ilana came, she must have come, if I said 3 munchkins, she must have come from at the time of the ritual bath. Elisa, the difference between my 3rd and 4th is 7 years. So she came along a lot later. And then as you start reading the dedications, there's more and more grandchildren until the final, until this
right.
book, there's quite a few more kids. But Peter and Rena I've taken them a lot of places, but they've taken me a lot of places too. And my fans are just the greatest. They're so wonderful and they're so loyal, and they have propelled my career to a very, very mid-listed, forgettable The Ritual Bath with, 1,100 copies published and maybe 500 sold into a New York Times bestseller. So I am so grateful for them and for their support and for the support of all the bookstores and all the book proprietors and all the people who have made it possible. You don't become a published writer without many, many steps in between. And as you notice with the dedication, it goes way back to our first agent, to our publishers, and all the people who brought us to this particular moment.
It is. No, it's a lovely dedication, and it's quite long. I myself know your editor, Carrie Fearon. I've known her for many years, and she's a wonderful editor. And it's nice too to have a career where you stay with a publisher for such a long time. I mean, Jonathan has been with his publisher for a really long time, and that I think is very nurturing to a writer when you don't have to learn stuff all over again. It's great to be able to do that. I really thought you did a wonderful job doing what you wanted to do, which is bringing everything together and giving some resolution to the various characters here. And you're right that it's hard for a writer, but it's really hard for fans when a series just kind of, that's it. And people are left in a bad place. The characters are not necessarily in a comfortable spot for the readers to say, get on with your life. So how long did it take you to write this book? This is about 2 years, isn't it?
Yes, it did. It did not take that long to write it. It was a COVID book, and it occupied most of my COVID time. So it actually took a very, very short time to write the book. It's more or less a continuation of the previous book, The Lost Boys, which I left dangling. And as a matter of fact, the first intro chapter is the last chapter of The Lost Boys. I didn't want to put them all together because A, it would take me too long to write, and B, the book would be way, way too long. So there was a shorter arc story in The Lost Boys that had to do with 3 lost boys. But there was this developmentally disabled man who was lost. And that is the long arc that was brought over in The Hunt. And Peter is still more or less hunting for this guy and for resolution of what happens there. So he has his hunt, and Terry and Chris have their hunt, and how it's brought together is kind of, I hope, a shocker at the end. And that's it. Like I said, it was the book I kind of wanted to go out with. It's not that I am probably never going to write again, but it's going to be a while. It's going to be a long while, because life is very, very short. You see it passing you by, your kids get older, and what's really scary is your grandchildren get older. And then you realize, well, what do I want to do? I have been in this niche for so long, and sitting in California and writing my books and my kids and my grandchildren. And there's a lot of other life that we want to live. And there's a lot of life that I want to be more of a part of my family's life as well. Not that I ever abdicated that responsibility, but I want to do it with ease without something hanging over my head. And there's a lot of world out there, and I want to see it all.
I'm sure you will. I mean, I have to tell you that when I turned 70, I thought, now I'm going to really be old and I won't be able to do anything. 80 is harder, but here I am. And I've been actually thinking, maybe 85, maybe I'll think about slowing down some, because I look around at all the books that I'd like to reread or I haven't read, or we talk about trips. Rob and I actually, I think, maybe we were thwarted for my 80th birthday. Rob had booked a trip that went from New Zealand to Australia to Tasmania and down to the Antarctic, excuse me, on the New Zealand end of Antarctica.
And you went to the Northwest Passage too.
Well, we did that, but we had been in 22 years ago. I mean, 20 years ago, we went to Antarctica from South America. We went from Ushuaia across the Drake Passage, got caught in a typhoon, had to hide behind Elephant Island, loved Antarctica. And we thought it would be a wonderful thing to go back. Well, I saw yesterday, National Geographic is doing a trip where we start in Buenos Aires, go to Ushuaia, back down to Antarctica, and then go all the way across Antarctica and come up and end in New Zealand. It's
well, there you go.
35 days or something of the sort. And I thought, okay, as you say, life is short, and maybe it's best to just go ahead and do things like that, step into them, and do them because you don't know how long you've got to do it.
Yeah, and while you're still feeling well and while you're still upbeat about everything and you can move rapidly, it's for a writer, especially John's still actively writing. The more of the world you see, the more ideas you get. Even if John's books are very much centered in Los Angeles, John and Jesse's books are very much centered in San Francisco. You need to get out to be able to refresh your mind. It's just, you have to do that. And John and I always tried to travel. It wasn't always easy with 4 kids, but now that they're grown and things are going around, life is you're seeing life is not finite, and you don't see the end, but you see it as a finite entity, and you want to grab as much of it as you can.
As you said, you have to feel like you want to do things like that. And of course, you have extra grandchildren, because last time around you got twins, which but one more than you were actually anticipating, which might have been a big surprise for Jesse too. But still, you've got a wonderful new generation of Kellermans to be bringing up.
A wonderful new generation of wonderful children, good children, involved children, lovely children. Perhaps we'll get some writers. I know we have some very, very creative grandchildren out of them. I have to tell you a funny story. I was trying to entertain my kids when they were grandchildren, when they were a little bit younger. And we did one of those round robin kind of things, like you start a story and then you stop and the next person continues it on, and then they stop and they continue on. And I had one grandchild who kept on saying every time it was turn, and the lion ate everybody up and there were blood and guts everywhere. And I thought to myself, she's going to be the writer.
I love it. Why don't we call Pat up and see if we have questions or comments from the audience, because we might.
Hey, Barbara. Hey, Faye. All right. So Deb Helscher, one of our great customers here in Phoenix, was really curious where you ultimately get your ideas. Where do they stem from?
As I said during this interview, you have to get out of the world. That you can be a Jane Austen and think of all of it in your head, but then again, brilliant writers or the Bronte sisters I was thinking of, but they wrote in a very circumspect world. For me to get ideas and even bring them back to a more local situation, I have to go out and explore. So I read a lot, I think a lot, I walk a lot and get a lot of ideas when I do that. I used to, before COVID, I was a big eavesdropper on conversations. You hear the darndest things when you do that. So the answer is you get your ideas from everywhere. You just have to keep your eyes and ears open.
Writers pay more attention to things than we might think. They do eavesdrop and they ask questions, because writing, I mean, really most of it is asking questions. If this happened, then what if? And many of us just go along and don't think that way. But I think writers instinctively think that way. So story ideas are just everywhere.
You have to just be involved. That's the best way to get an idea. My daughter grew up in the 90s during the original Pokemon. And she has some of these old Pokemon cards. And I don't know if you know, but Pokemon is back in fashion now. So I took some of the old cards and I had them evaluated. And some of them were worth a little bit, most of them were not. But that's not the point. The place where I had it evaluated, I had never been into like a GameStop or a game store where people, all these kind of darker images and the person behind the counter. It's just very interesting. And I said, this would be a good scene in a book. So, things like that. That's where you get your ideas. You have to get out.
Linda Schmetzel, one of our frequent online viewers, she was really curious because she's read The Hunt, and she really enjoyed the fact that you had an Arabian cop working for the Israeli police department.
Mm-hmm.
So she was really curious, where did that come from? And she felt that his plight seemed very true. And do you feel that it's still true?
I don't remember an Arabic cop in The Hunt.
Okay.
You refresh my memory. Maybe she's thinking of Butcher's Theater for Jonathan.
It very well could be. It could be.
Because he had a novel called Butcher's Theater set in Israel, and he had a Yemenite Jewish cop, and there were Arabic cops there too, and there still are. I mean, Israel. There are some areas that are distinctly Arabic and some areas that are distinctly Jewish, but there's a lot of mixing in between that most people don't realize or don't talk about because they really don't know the country. So there are a lot of Arabic cops in the Jerusalem Police Department.
It sounds like she's mixing up books a little bit, but that's okay. What is it like being a family of writers?
We are a family first. We don't talk a lot about our writing. That's a question that I think would be really well directed to Jesse and John when their book comes out, because they are the two family writers that are together. I've always kept my work very separate. John's always kept his work very separate from me. Our meals do not. Our family meals never really revolved around us. They revolved around the children. And they had so much to say that, we kind of just sat and listened, which is, I suspect, it's the way with most parents. I suspect most children don't exactly know what their parents do, even though they know he's a lawyer, he's a writer. They don't know their day-to-day things. And that's how we wanted it.
Other than that, I mean, we've got viewers from all around the world. Let me see if any have popped up here on YouTube or on Facebook while we've been chatting a little bit. Mark Sussick always likes to know who's publishing your book. And I guess to add to that, have you always been with the same publisher?
The book is from William Morrow. I've been with Morrow, which is a division of Harper. Arbor House was bought over by William Moore. So I did do one defection for 3 years to, it was Warner at that time, which I now think it's Hachette. It evolved into that. But basically, I've been with the same publishing house. And like Barbara said, it's very nice because there's a lot of nurturance that takes place there, a lot of patience. And especially back in 1986, when the ritual bath first came out, it was the nurturance and the patience of the industry that allowed me to have my career. I don't know if it could have happened in today's market. But back then, when there were far less, there was far less choices for your entertainment dollar. It was before cable TV. Things were just quieter and slower back then. You wanted to go to a movie, you didn't wait till it came out on video. You went to the movie, and it made it exciting because it wasn't something where you could just sit back and wait for it to passively happen. So books will never go out of fashion, but they were much more in the forefront back then.
I think so too. And publishers were far more patient and far more nurturing. If they acquired a talent, they didn't expect dramatic returns right at the very beginning. As Faye has pointed out, the Ritual Bath was a relatively small print run, and maybe the sales were not tremendous, but it also was a book that created a lot of what we call buzz today, which is not a word I love, but I can remember people talking about it. The content was exciting, the characters were exciting, people who didn't know anything about some Orthodox Jewish rituals were fascinated with it. It was a great beginning. What was Arbor House? I mean, was Arbor House an independent publisher, Faye, or was it acquired by William Morrow?
It was acquired by William Morrow, and William Morrow in turn was acquired by HarperCollins. That was another thing I wanted to bring out. At the time that I broke in and Jonathan broke in, there were a lot of publishing houses.
Yes, exactly.
Little ones and larger ones. And now that so many of them have just been swallowed up, you have Penguin Random House or Random House Penguin, I don't even know, and then this big merger that is constantly, with the Bertelsmann that's going on right now, Simon & Schuster. There were many smaller publishing houses, and Arbor House was one of them. Again, they had more patience because they didn't have the kind of financial outlay that they require nowadays. Now they want the big book, they pay the big advances, and they want the big book, and they pump a lot of money into just very what they think is going to be the latest book. And the other authors kind of get either they don't bother with them or they just kind of sideline. There was a lot of myth-listed authors back then who had made it because publishers were patient, but it's much more corporate. And I'm not putting a value judgment on it, whether it's good or whether it's bad. I'm just saying for an author, of course, it's good to have a lot more choices.
Well, as we are going from 5 major publishers due to this conglomeration to potentially 4, one of the positive things about it is there's more room now for more small publishers, and there are quite a few of them beginning to rise up again. But if you're an author who wants to make a living as opposed to just being published, it's only the bigger houses that have the cash resources to do that. So a lot of writers that are publishing with smaller houses have to keep working at whatever other job they had. But I think that we're going to see, as a consequence of consolidation, we're going to see more smaller publishers coming back and doing well. And there is also the opportunity to publish independently today that was really almost impossible before.
Online. I've seen and read, people send us books, and I usually don't read unpublished manuscripts, but you have personal friends who send them to you who are writers, and they're good writers. they just can't break in.
Yeah.
Because even though the writing is solid and the story is solid, they want the next big thing. It's like in movies. You had tons of small movies that didn't go anywhere, but making a movie is so expensive nowadays that
Right.
they really want the blockbusters. And sometimes the blockbusters aren't as good as that little small movie that.
No, often they're not, that's for sure. And there are a lot of wonderful books that that it's hard to find them, it's hard to get to them. For me, it's hard to, to do that. I feel guilty much of the time that I don't get to read as many books as I would like to, because even though you're right that it's harder, there are actually more titles being published. I mean, there's just this huge number of them, but a lot of them are really more product than they are books. And,
Yeah.
And that makes it
Yeah.
hard to kind of figure out what to do. But anyway, any more questions there, Pat? I mean, the world keeps evolving and there's not much we can do except adjust to it as we go.
No, and it's fine. I have no problem. It's not the world, like I said, that I grew up in as a child, and it's not the world that I grew up in as a published writer, but it's a fine world. I'm not going to be you can't be a grump. I mean, you have to just go out and say, okay, this is what I have. I'm going to take bull by the horns and enjoy as much as I am. And I have a very optimistic nature in general. So, and I'm resolutely tenacious, and I want to have a good time. That is my goal in life, is to find out as much adventure as I can.
That's an excellent way to end this program. So thank you all for joining us. And Faye, it's lovely to see you. I'll look forward to seeing you, Jonathan, probably in February, and Jonathan and Jesse whenever they have their new book out. But
yeah, they have a new one that they're currently writing, and John always has a new one in the works, and he's out in February. And we love Poison Pen. To all your constituents out there, please go out and support your local bookstore. We love you guys, and they need you. So go and buy a book and talk to the people in the bookstores. You'd be surprised how happy you'll be by doing that.
Well, thank you very much. So good night, everybody. Thanks again for joining us. And Faye, love to your family. Good night, PK.